I haven't reviewed a Plastic Soldier Company kit for a while, so I bought something fun. A box of British A9 and A10 Cruiser tanks. These have been tempting me at my local hobby shop for ages, and I just wanted to build them. So here we are. Join me as we have a look at the Plastic Soldier Company's 15mm Cruiser Mark 1 A9 and Cruiser Mark 2 A10. This is the Plastic Soldier Company box set of A9 and A10 Cruiser tanks in 15mm. The hard plastic kit has parts to build either the A9 or the A10 version of this interwar British tank. Plastic Soldier Company released quite a few 15mm plastic kits, mostly World War II but some Cold War tanks as well. These were always nice alternatives for wargamers. This A9 and A10 kit isn't new, it's about 6 years old now, but it is still worth having a look at. The front of the box has some artwork of an A9 in a European paint scheme, presumably with the British Expeditionary Force in France in 1940. The box contains parts to make 5 vehicles. If we look at the back of the box, there's some more artwork. A side view of an A10 in a plain green scheme, as well as a top view of an A10 in a plain desert scheme. There are also some Vallejo paint callouts for the pictured schemes. That will come in handy. The kit is marked as suitable for battle group, but these kits are compatible with any 15mm tabletop wargame rules. Inside the box are 5 sprues of medium grey plastic and a single-page instruction sheet. The sheet has a colour-coded sprue image on one side. This identifies the parts required to build any of the 5 variants listed in the kit. On the other hand is a step-by-step assembly guide for a European A10 Mark 2A. It's the only assembly option covered. You need to use this as a basis for assembling any of the other variants. The other half of this sheet is a numbered sprue image and a key of part names. Quite often this indicates if the part is for the A9 or A10. This should help find the parts you need for the different variants. Let's look at the plastic. There's a lot going on here. Each tank comes on a single large sprue of medium grey plastic. Parts count is often a bit higher for PSC kits than other 15mm kits. Their engineering is a bit more akin to model kits than wargaming kits. The parts are well moulded with just a bit of flash on some parts, nothing too major. Detail is adequate for a wargaming kit and moulded in reasonable relief. Parts are in true scale, meaning things like gun barrels are quite fine and might be a bit delicate for wargame use. This first section of sprue has the 2 upper hull options for the A9 Cruiser. The only difference between these hulls are that one has desert sand shields. Use this one for any A9s you intend to use in North Africa. Both A9 and A10 were interwar designs and featured riveted armour. There's plenty of raised rivet detail represented here. The 2 small turrets are the auxiliary hull machine gun turrets. Each one is armed with a Vickers machine gun. The other part just off screen is the exhaust. The crew figures are a 2-part desert commander and a single-piece European commander. There's also a 2-part external fuel tank usually used on desert tanks. This second section has the 2 lower hull parts, the 1-piece tracks, another fuel drum and the A10 lower front hull plate. While the A9 and A10 are very similar, the hull was completely redesigned. This lower hull is for the A9, while the other one is for the A10. The A10 hull also needs the separate lower front plate piece here. Again, there's lots of nice rivet detail. The tracks are 1-piece parts. The track tread detail is simplified but should be okay for a wargaming model. The Horstman type suspension has 2 sets of bogies on each side. Each bogie has 1 large road wheel and 2 smaller ones, mounted on a bell crank. The same system would also go on to be used on the Valentine infantry tank. In fact, Valentine's entire lower hull is essentially an up-armoured version of the A10 hull. This section has the 2 A10 upper hull parts, as well as the A10 driver's compartment and hull side detail panels. Note the A10 design has removed the machine gun turrets. Again, there are 2 upper hulls here, one for the standard European hull and one fitted with desert sand shield side skirts. Providing 2 entire separate hulls for this rather than including separate sand shield means the kit has a lot of extra plastic. The driver's compartment is a raised riveted box on the hull front. There are 2 versions here, one with the Beezer machine gun fitted next to the driver and another with the port blanked off. The hull side panels add a lot of detail to the hull, including some handholds. Adding this level of side detail in a two-part injection mould requires these to be separate pieces. The last section of sprue is a doozy. It has all the turret parts, gun mantlets and guns for the array of turret types you can build. These parts are common to all the turrets. They're the side, top and bottom faces of the turret. There's lots of rivet detail here, so be careful during assembly to preserve this. It's not a PSC kit without some sort of parts and assembly error somewhere. The turret rear pieces here are mislabelled. The piece here, number 27, marked for the A9, has some hinges at the bottom. This is actually for the A10. The hinges attach the added turret stowage box under the turret overhang. So use part 20 without the hinges for the A9 and part 27 with the hinges for the A10. These two front mantlets are for the A9. One is for the howitzer-armed A9 CS, while the other is for the 2-pounder armed gun tank version. A10 has two mantlets as well. This one is for the early A10, armed with a 2-pounder gun and a coaxial Vickers machine gun. The other is a later design for the A10 Mark IIA version, which can be armed with the 2-pounder gun or the 3.7-inch howitzer. Unfortunately, this mantlet has a very noticeable sink mark on the front just next to the gun trunnion. This will be hard to fill in amongst all the rivet detail. Let's go through the guns. Starting from the left of screen, these two are for the A9. They're the 3.7-inch close support howitzer and the 2-pounder gun. Next is the howitzer and Beezer machine gun for the A10 Mark IIA CS version. Then there's the 2-pounder and Beezer for the A10 Mark IIA gun tank. And finally there's the 2-pounder gun and Vickers coaxial gun of the early A10. The last parts to mention are the open and closed commander's hatch options, the loader's hatch and the A10 turret stowage basket. So that's the parts for the Plastic Soldier Company 15mm A9 A10 Cruiser Tank kit. There are some issues like sink marks and flash, but there's enough to work with here to make some decent kits. Parts count is higher than other wargaming kits, more like a model in some respects. I don't have a problem with this, just don't expect to throw these together and plop them on the table. Parts will require a bit of cleanup. There are also some tolerance issues like the very close fitting of the A9 machine gun turrets, as well as the turret peg and hull. Expect to do some fettling to get these in. Detail is okay and there are plenty of rivets. However, the detail is moulded true to scale. This generally means it's shallower than the heroic relief of some other manufacturers in this scale. True scale also means gun barrels are thin, particularly on a 2-pounder gun-armed tank. This is okay in a display model, but delicate parts like this are prone to breakage. Wargaming kits are subject to a lot more handling and transport during play. You will need to take some care. My final comment about this is there's a lot of unnecessary duplicated plastic. There are 4 entire upper hull assemblies where the difference between each pair is just sand skirts. There was probably a way to engineer the kit parts to avoid that. Despite these issues, this is the only A9 and A10 Cruiser tank kits I know of in plastic. I like them and I'm happy to have them. Let's look at some history. In the 1930s, British tank doctrine outlined roles for light tanks, infantry tanks and cruiser tanks. Cruiser tanks were meant to be fast exploitation tanks designed to dash into an enemy's rear area and create havoc. This meant an emphasis on speed over armour protection. Britain had been searching for a replacement for their medium Mark II tanks, but all the designs trialled were considered too expensive. In response to a General Staff specification for a cheaper replacement, Vickers Armstrong submitted a design for what would become Tank Cruiser Mark I A9. The tank was thinly armoured to save weight and increase speed. This fitted the speedy cruiser tank doctrine. Armour thickness was only about half an inch. The lightweight meant it could be powered by a commercially available engine. Power plant for the production tanks was a 9.5-litre AEC bus engine. Armament was the excellent ordnance quick-firing 2-pounder 40mm gun mounted in a power traverse turret. At the time, the 2-pounder was a class-leading anti-tank weapon, easily able to penetrate the armour of tanks then in service. Crew was 6 men, commander, loader, gunner, driver and 2 machine gunners. The machine gunners manned the 2 auxiliary turrets on either side of the driver's position. Each turret had a Vickers machine gun with about a 120-degree angle of fire. Multi-turret tank designs were popular in the interwar period, but largely fell away during World War II. Vickers designer Sir John Carden devised a triple-wheel bogie suspension system for the A9 Cruiser based on the Horstman-type suspension in widespread use on other Vickers designs. About 125 A9 Cruiser tanks were built. Some saw action with the 1st Armoured Division in 1940 during the fall of France. Many were subsequently abandoned in the retreat, captured by the Germans and pressed into service. In North Africa, A9s were used by the 2nd and 7th Armoured Divisions until 1941. In the desert, the machine gun turrets called dustbins were often too hot to crew and were left empty. A number of A9 cruisers were also lost in Greece. But the A9 Cruiser was an interwar design, and it showed. It was mechanically unreliable, still tended to throw its tracks, and had inadequate armour protection. A heavier version of the A9 design was in development even as the A9 was entering production. This was intended as an infantry support tank, but it proved unsuitable and was reclassified as a heavy cruiser. It would become the Tank Cruiser Mark II A10. The A10 increased armour protection to about an inch. It had the same engine and drivetrain as the A9, so top speed was reduced. The 2 machine gun turrets were removed. In this A10E1 prototype you can see there's just a central driver's compartment. The production tank enlarged the driving compartment, moving the driver to the left and adding a hull machine gun position. This left the A10 armed with a .303 caliber Vickers coaxial machine gun in the turret, with a 7.92mm Beezer machine gun in the hull. In early production A10s the Beezer was not fitted and the mounting was plated over. The main gun was still the 2-pounder gun. This was a good gun in France and against Italian tanks in the desert. However, its effectiveness was being quickly eroded as Germany fielded newer tanks with thicker armour. A new, more slimlined mantlet design for the turret replaced the Vickers coaxial machine gun with a Beezer, resulting in the designation A10 Cruiser Mark IIA. Both the A9 and A10 could also be modified to mount a 3.7-inch howitzer for fire support. Doctrine had these close support tanks providing smokescreen cover for advances or retreats rather than direct fire support. Like the A9, the A10 served in France, North Africa and Greece, but again numbers were limited with only 175 built. As they were destroyed or wore out, both types were replaced by more modern designs. The A10 lower hull and suspension would be up-armoured and used for the Valentine Infantry Tank Mark III. So that's the A9 and A10 Cruiser Tank 15mm box set from the Plastic Soldier Company. Despite its flaws, I really liked it. There are more parts than you might expect from a more modern model, but there are a lot of options included too. Admittedly, it doesn't fall together as we've come to expect with plastic kits from other manufacturers, but in the end it builds up into a nice model if you take a bit of care. Even the fit issues just take a bit of sanding and clean-up to sort out. I had to chuckle at the minor issue with mislabeling parts in the instructions. It isn't a PSC kit without an error somewhere, and this one is pretty minor. Only a grognard like me would even spot it. It's great to have these 2 important British vehicles available in 15mm plastic. There wasn't a plan to use these when I bought the box. I just wanted to review them. Now I'm thinking maybe there's a way to use them as support for my early war Australian list in Flames of War. This kit was chosen as the next Fog of War review kit by a viewer poll on the Modelling for Advantage livestream in February. You should check out the Flames of War live streams I do with Modelling for Advantage, and maybe next time you'll get to vote in the poll too. Hope you enjoyed the look at this kit. See you next time.